Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to part 9, the final part to our Godot mobile RPG series. This series has been sponsored by my Kickstarter. It's a Godot course. You can check that out. There'll be a card and a link in the description. And let's get started. So, first off, remember the error that we were having? When we killed the enemy sometimes, and it wasn't all the time, we would get this error message where it would say resumed yield, but class instance is gone. Now, the reason it was only sometimes, I did some debugging and figured this out, is because it only gives us that error if the very last, if the killing blow takes our last action point. Now, the reason we get this error is because what happens is a little bit of an order issue. So our enemy gets killed and we fire off the enemy died event and the enemy end turn event. However, when the enemy end turn event fires, it starts the enemy turn. So, our enemy dies, but also at the same time, our action points reach 0. So we get both the enemy died event and the enemy end turn. Now, the problem is that when we kill the enemy, we use queue free, right? Which is actually good because we don't want to just free the enemy. We want to queue it for deletion. But that means that removing the enemy from the battle units right here doesn't actually happen on that frame. It happens a little bit later. It doesn't happen right away. And so what's happening is we're actually starting the enemy turn and the enemy isn't null yet. And so then it starts the enemy attack and tries to yield. But the problem is the enemy at this point has been deleted, and so then it tries to return, but the enemy is no longer there. So it basically tries to run the enemy's turn, even though the enemy has been destroyed. So the way that we can fix this is by adding a line here that says and not enemy dot is queued for deletion. And what this does is it just makes sure that the enemy isn't, this function right here allows us to check to see if an object has been queued for deletion. So if it's going to be deleted but hasn't quite been deleted yet. And so we want to make sure that the enemy hasn't been queued for deletion. And if we do that, then you can see as we attack, the last hit works just fine. It does leave these buttons up, but we can enter the next room and we're good to go, starting over. Okay. So the final thing we're going to add to the game is we're going to add a new hover control that will allow us to detect if the mouse is hovering over something and then display some text down here if we're hovering over it. So we'll probably add one for the sword, one for the heal, and one for the enemy, for the 2 enemies that we have. So we'll create a new scene and we'll do a user interface scene and we'll call this hover info. And we'll add a script to this. Great. And we can just get rid of these for now. And we'll save this new scene. We'll attach the mouse entered event to our script, creating a function. And we'll do the same thing with the mouse exited signal. Then we can create a variable here that will export, so we can modify this variable in the editor. Export string, and this one's going to be a multi-line line. If you want to learn more about exports, I highly recommend looking up GD script in Google, and then there's an article in the Godot docs that talks a lot more about different exports and the different options you have available. I usually pull up that article and then do Control F and then search for export, and that gives me all the different options I have available. So we're going to export description. There we go. When the mouse hovers over it, let's just call print description. And when the mouse exits, we'll just leave it to not do anything for now. But eventually we'll do something with that. Okay, so we've got our hover info. Now we can use this scene and instance it inside of the areas where we want to use it. So come into our battle action scene. We'll type tscn so we can easily find it. Our action button right here. And we're going to, there's this little icon right here that allows you to instance a scene. Oh, you can also just drag and drop it up, actually. That's just as easy. And you can see it covers the button like this. It automatically covers the button. And then we can give it information, a description. But we don't want to give this one a description because this is just the generic one. We want to actually close out of this, open up the sword action button, and give this one a description. So you can click on it. Even though it's kind of faded, that means we're inheriting it from the parent, we can still change the description. Sword deals, what does it deal? 4 damage. I think it deals 4 damage. So we'll save. We'll open up heal. Heal. Heals. What was it? 5 health. 5 health, I think. Okay. Is 5 health. And the sword does deal 4 damage. Okay. If we hover over it, you can see sword deals 4 damage. Hover over heal. Heal deals 5 health, or heals 5 health. Perfect. However, we can't click on our buttons anymore. And this comes back to the issue that we talked about in the last video, which is where if you have 2 control nodes on top of each other, Godot tries to ignore the one underneath, which is a lot of the time what you want. You want to access the one on top, not the one on bottom. But if we look here, if we open up our action button here, in the other one we just turned the mouse to ignore, right? Well, this time we can't do that because then our text won't show up anymore. We won't be able to detect hover. If we run our game here with it set to ignore, it no longer detects the hover over the button either. Like now we can click the button like before, but we're not showing our text down here. So what you want to switch it to is pass. That means it will capture mouse input for the hover, but then it also passes whatever's left over down to the button underneath. So now we get the best of both. Okay, now let's try it for our enemy. So our enemy scene, we'll drag and drop our hover info over it. And we'll have to manually set the size, I think, here. Okay, to start, then we can drag it and resize it. We'll just set it to a size about like this. We'll want to obviously update each enemy so that the window for hovering is about the same. Basically, so it matches the sprite size fairly well. So for slime, do this. And I don't remember if I changed it. I think I changed it in here, the mouse. Yeah, we want to change. See, this is pass here. Well, I guess it probably doesn't matter on our enemies. So we'll just leave them the way they are. And then the rat is probably already going to be set up because of the other one. Yeah, good enough. So now we're going to update this. A mean rat. A green slime, just in case they didn't know it was green. And that's good. Simple descriptions. Now if we run the game, we should be able to see these descriptions. And we're not seeing the description on the enemy. And once again, this is going to be a very common issue. This is because there's the center container here and its mouse is stopping the input. We want to ignore the input for that one. No, because then I don't think our next room button will work. We might have to pass it. Let's see. Well, that didn't work anyways. Ignore. There's not any other UI on our enemies, right? There's the HP label, but that's up high enough it shouldn't matter. So somewhere along the line, our input is getting captured, and we're going to have to figure out where that is. Battle. We've got this, our main UI node. And what's it doing? Stopping the mouse, so maybe we pass. Pass, and let's set this to well, we shouldn't have to set this one because I think this will inherit then. Let's test that. So I set UI to pass, center container to stop. Let's see what happens. That didn't work, so let's try setting center container to pass as well and see if we're able to capture enemy. Nope, still not quite yet. Our stats panel isn't in the way. Text box shouldn't be in the way. Battle actions not in the way. The fade, we've already set fade to ignore the mouse, so that should work. Is the next room button getting in the way? We could set its mouse to pass as well. Let's see if that's the problem. Well, let's run our slime scene. And you can see it is working if we just run the slime scene. So something inside of battle is overriding it and capturing that input. Let's try setting all of these to ignore just as a test. And there, now it works. And we're still able to capture input in here. Now the button we can't have set to ignore. Let's set it back to stop, save, and test this. Yep, and we're still working. We're getting the green slime now. And our next room stuff is working. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to, the final thing that we need to do now that we've got that set up and it's all working, is make sure that the hover info can access the text box. So our battle, we can get access to the text box here. Well, we can do it, let's do it this way first. We'll just say var main get tree dot current scene var text box equals main dot find node text box. I think it's just called text box. Text box panel. Oh, we don't actually have a text box area yet. So we'll add that. So under text box panel, we're going to add a node. It's going to be a rich text label. And we're going to set its theme to new theme. Wait, not theme. Sorry. We're not going to set its theme. We're going to set its style to new style box empty. So that will make it invisible like this. And then we'll reposition. Whoops. That's our fade. We don't want our fade to be selectable. So let's lock that. And we'll reposition this so that it fits inside of here nicely. We may end up adjusting this. Let's actually put some text in here. Here is a test so we can see how it looks. Okay, so we can add some custom constants here. First of all, we probably want to move in from the edges just a tad. And then we probably want to change our spacing. So our table V separation here, let's try adding a single pixel, 2 pixels. No, that's not right. Line separation. Yeah, that's it. Line separation. So we'll do 2 pixels, 3 pixels. Now this depends on how many lines you want to get here. If you do like 1 or if you do 2 pixels, it doesn't look like you can quite fit any more lines. So you might as well do 3, I think, because that looks the best in my opinion. Or does 4 look good? No, 4 is a little too low for me. I think 3 looks the best. Then we could move this down 1 more. And you don't want scrolling on. Turn off scrolling for sure. Okay, so I've repositioned it. That looks okay. We'll name this text box, and we'll just save. And then in hover info, we'll say my mouse is being weird. If text box does not equal null, text box.text equals description. And then we can do the same thing down here, but on text box.text equals, and we'll just do empty so that it doesn't display anything. We'll see if this works. So sword deals 4 damage, heals 5 health, a green slime. So there we've got the basics. And we got the green slime again. I want to try and get the rat so we can make sure that it worked, but it should. Seriously? We're gonna have to heal. There we go, a mean rat. And our text looked a little bit different. I'm not sure, this font seems to look slightly different in the room than it does in the editor. And I'm not sure why that is, if my font's a little messed up. You can see that looks a little bit lower than it does in here. So maybe a custom constant of 2 is actually better in the end. Yeah, that actually looks better in the game than it does in the editor. So I'm gonna leave it at that actually. and you've got the very basics there. And if I'm going to make like a small challenge at the end of this series, so here's a couple things to think about. Try adding some more enemies and adding some more actions that you can choose from. You could potentially add a leveling system where your character levels up and gains experience when they kill enemies. One thing you could try and fix here is how we're getting access to text box, because we're doing it through find node again. So you could maybe set up a resource that has access to text box and then give the hover info access to that resource. So you could do that like we did in the last video. There's a few different things you could try and do to continue extending this series and learning on your own. But I hope in the end that you really enjoyed this series. I had a lot of fun making it. I learned a lot along the way, and I hope you'll check out my Kickstarter. There will be a link in the description. I really appreciate all the support that you all have given me up to this point, and I will talk to you all later.